This is not only true in other countries, it is also true in the United States. This reduction in marijuana use by juveniles has also held true in all the U.S. states where they passed medical marijuana bills or where they decriminalized a certain portion of marijuana. Drug use among young people went down far more than it did in other states where they didn't decriminalize or pass medical marijuana. I don't know why that might happen. Maybe it's just for a young person it's not quite as cool to smoke a joint when that's what grandma does for glaucoma. In closing, I would like to thank the committee for allowing me to speak in support of H. 1393. This bill is an important step in reducing the harms of drug prohibition. By supporting it, you are speaking out in favor of a public policy that will be far more effective, more ethical, less damaging, and far less costly than that of marijuana prohibition. Thank you for your time. I'll take any questions. It is counterintuitive, but it is a fact that when you decriminalize drugs, you have less use of those drugs by young people. This is true, as I pointed out, in Portugal. It's also true in the Netherlands. The Netherlands decriminalized marijuana 34 years ago. And some years ago, our presidential administration thought, well, gee, this would be a perfect example to show the public in the United States what terrible things can happen when you loosen up the drug laws. So they sent some of our scientists to the Netherlands to do a survey of their 10th graders and find out how many of those little rascals had used marijuana. And they found that 28% of them had used marijuana. And marijuana there, it's not legal, but it's decriminalized to the point where if you're an adult, and an adult is 18 in the Netherlands, you can go into a coffee shop and buy 5 grams of marijuana or hashish every time you walk in the door. They found that 28% of their 10th graders had used marijuana. And somebody said, well, don't you think you better do a comparison test on our 10th graders? And they did, and they found out that 41% of our 10th graders had tried. So that wasn't what they were looking, that wasn't the answer they were after at all. They went back to the Netherlands and they spoke to the drug czar of the Netherlands, who happens to be the Minister of Health, because in the Netherlands they treat drug abuse as a health problem, not a crime problem. And when they asked him, how could it be that where marijuana is virtually legal, your 10th graders, 28% use them, and in the United States, where we treat marijuana as the devil's own weed, 41% of our 10th graders are using. And I think his answer to that was right on. He said, you know, I think in Holland we've managed to make pot cool. Yeah, he says, you know, young people aren't likely to act out against authority figures by doing something that's just ho-hum. And they know when they turn 18, they can walk into any coffee shop they want and get all they want. So what he said this means is that they don't start using drugs at the tender age of 14, which is entry-level age for drug abuse in this country. And he said, if you can just prevent those young people from deciding, will I or won't I use a drug for those 4 very formative years of your life, 14 to 18, so many fewer of them will ever decide to use that drug. That he pointed out on a per capita basis, the use of soft drugs, marijuana, hashish, in the Netherlands is 1/2 the use in the United States. 1/2. And the use of hard drugs, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, is 1/4 of what it is in the United States per capita. And he said the reason that they believe it's so much less for hard drugs is because young people experimenting with drug use who want to, when they turn 18 and want to try a soft drug, go into a coffee shop where they want to sell them a soft drug. Not go to a criminal on the street who would much rather hook them on heroin and cocaine and methamphetamine. The murder rate is 140. Apparently they're doing something right. And let me suggest to you, it's not by making harsher drug policies. In the Netherlands, as a matter of fact, in all of Western Europe, they imprison their population at or below 150 per 100,000. In the Netherlands, it's 127 per 100,000. We imprison our population at the rate of 1,009 per 100,000. That means that 1 out of every 100 people in this country is in prison or jail or waiting. That's almost unbelievable. Either we have the most vile, criminal, horrible people in this country, or we're doing something wrong. There's something wrong with the place. And that's all we're talking about. And most of these people are in those prisons because of drug prohibition.
Just a last question from me. Your history as a law enforcement officer, how many of those, I think you said 1,000 cases, or rape cases, both that you put away, how many of them were placed away based on marijuana, or did you see a combination of marijuana and other drugs? Going back to, can marijuana, or is marijuana some type of gateway?
Excellent question, Representative. Let me preface this by saying I started my undercover work at the beginning of the war on drugs in 1970. And we really didn't have much of a drug problem in this country in 1970. My belief is that the drug problem was virtually created out of cold blood by the war on drugs. Here's the way that worked. I joined the New Jersey State Police in 1964. We had 1,700 troopers. We had a 7-man narcotic unit. We seemed perfectly adequate for the job we needed to do. 6 years later, we had exactly those same numbers until October of 1970, when I went into narcotics. When, thanks to the fact that Mr. Richard Nixon had created his own war on drugs, he's the one that coined and created the phrase, and got the U.S. Congress that year to pass massive funding bills that would give tremendous amounts of money to any police department willing to hire officers to fight these war on drugs. Thanks to that bill, overnight, we went from a 7-man narcotic unit to a 76-person narcotic bureau. We increased the number of police doing that one job by 11 times its size. And when you do something like that, you set up a great deal of expectation. In the following year, we were expected to arrest at least 11 times more people for drug violations than we did the year before. We had to justify our existence. And there just weren't a lot of drug dealers out there in 1970. To get most of your drugs, you had to go to the big city. You had to go to New York City or Newark or Philadelphia. I was working about 30 miles outside of New York City, and since there weren't many drug dealers, they targeted me and the other 35 people that went undercover for the state police against small groups of friendship groups, 10 to 15 people in a group, kids in college, kids in high school, kids in between. Come Friday night, somebody in that group, they're out of school, they're off work, somebody say, hey, you want to get high? And of course, if nobody said that, that was my job. If anybody took me up on that offer, one of the friends in that little friendship group who happened to have access to the family car or something to make the trip to New York City to get the drugs would go around to others and say, hey, you want to get high tonight? No, I got a test Sunday. No, I don't think so. How about you? Yeah, give me a couple of joints while you're doing that, will you? How about you? Well, if you run across anyone that has some acid, give me a hit of acid. And when they come to me, I put my order in for the same little piddling amount of drugs, right? They jump in the car, off they go to the city, they come back, and when they handed that out to their friends, they got to me, When they handed it to me, they became a big-time drug dealer. Because that's what we labeled them, and that's what stuck. And I might be working 10 of those friendship groups at the same time. Every 45 days, me and the other 35 undercover agents would have a raid. We'd have round up about 100 people that we had with charges like this. We'd go in at 5 o'clock in the morning with 350 cops. We'd kick their doors down and drag them out in chains. And when we got them down to the police station, we would have already called the reporters. The reporters would be there to take their pictures in that perp walk and destroy any credibility, respectability they had in their communities. And when we got them all lined up against that back wall, my boss would come out and say, "You see that? There's 95 major drug dealers we took out of your community." That's what he'd tell the reporters. Major drug dealers. We need more police, we need more money, need harsher laws, we have to stop this. This is terrible. The reason they did it was they needed to prove that the war on drugs was so essential that the federal people would keep paying for the money for those police. We hired 76 new police officers that year. That first year, they were all paid by the feds. We had to make it look so bad that the feds would keep paying for it, and that's what we did. And we virtually lied about everything that happened in those first years. And it's a shame. It's a shame, because those people back then, those people might have sold me marijuana, or they might have just given me marijuana. You remember that guy who used to smoke but didn't inhale? Let me tell you about it. If Mr. Clinton would have been in that friendship group, and this is right when he was smoking but not inhaling, it wouldn't have mattered whether he inhaled or not. That's a very social thing, especially soft drugs. You stand around in a circle of half a dozen people, you spark up one joint, take 2 tokes, hand it to the person on the right. They'd hand it to me, I'd pretend to take a toke, keep it going around. The next time it came around, everybody's getting high, the joint's getting smaller. When they handed it to me, I'd knock the flame off of that and I'd stick it in my pocket, and that night I would submit that as evidence that the person who handed it to me was a drug dealer. Because the way the laws are written, it doesn't say anything about getting money. The mere handing from one hand to the other one of these illicit drugs makes you a drug dealer. And had Mr. Clinton been standing in that circle and handed it to me, he wouldn't have been ever an attorney, much less the President of the United States. What are we doing now? And let me tell you what happened to those young people. They all went to prison for 7 years. That's what we were sentencing them to back then. And back then, the word of a cop was gospel. And nobody got out of it. He went to jail for 7 years. They came out, no education, no chance to get a job. Who are they going to turn to? The only place they can turn to is right back to that drug culture. This is terrible. We've got to stop it sometime. And what you guys are working on is so important. It's so important.
Thank you for your time.